What happens when a lonely millionaire CEO is faced with the most unexpected question of his life? A little 6-year-old girl walks into his office, clutching a single dollar, and asks, "Where can I buy a dad?" From that moment, his world changes forever. This is a heartwarming story of love, family, and a lesson that money can never buy what truly matters. Stay with us until the end, because this story will melt your heart and remind you of what every child in our society truly deserves. Patrick Oscar sat high above the city in his glass-walled office, 37 years old and surrounded by everything most men could only dream of. The city lights glittered below him like 1,000 diamonds, yet they meant nothing to him. His expensive suit was pressed to perfection, his golden pen smooth in his hand, and the contract before him worth millions. But deep inside, his life felt like an empty cage. The office was too quiet. The silence pressed against his chest. His mansion was the same, so vast that every step echoed, so polished that no warmth could cling to it. At night, Patrick often walked through the halls alone, his own reflection following him in giant windows, reminding him that he had no one waiting at the end of the corridor. His employees respected him, the world admired him, but no one loved him. Not truly, not deeply. That afternoon, he bent over a stack of papers, the steady scratch of his pen the only sound. He signed without emotion, numbers dancing across the page but never touching his heart. His assistant had just left, and he thought he was alone. Then, creak. The heavy door of his office moved, slow, hesitant, like someone was afraid to enter. Patrick's brows furrowed. No one dared walk into his office unannounced. He lifted his head, expecting to see an employee who had made a mistake. But what he saw made the pen slide right out of his hand. A small figure slipped inside. Not a polished businessman, not a lawyer, not a client with shiny shoes and contracts in hand. No, this was a child. She was no taller than his desk. Her hair was messy, golden curls tangled as if no one had brushed them that morning. Her shoes were scuffed and torn at the edges. Her dress hung loosely, as though it had been worn too many times, washed until the colors faded. Yet her eyes, oh, her eyes, stopped him cold. They weren't weak. They weren't timid. They were brave eyes, filled with a strange mix of innocence and sorrow that pierced through the millionaire's guarded heart. In her tiny hand, she clutched something so fragile, so pitiful, and yet so powerful, a crumpled dollar bill. She held it tightly, as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world, her little knuckles white from gripping it. Patrick felt his chest tighten. He was used to diamonds, gold, checks with endless zeros. But he had never seen a dollar bill held with so much hope, so much desperation, so much silent pleading. The little girl stepped forward, her shoes making soft, hesitant taps on the polished marble floor. She stopped right before his massive desk, dwarfed by its size, her chin barely reaching the edge. Then, in a voice so small, so fragile, yet filled with determination, she whispered words that shook Patrick's world apart. "Sir, where can I buy a dad?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Patrick's breath caught. His pen slipped from his fingers and rolled across the desk. The sound was sharp in the silence, but he barely heard it. His heart hammered against his ribs, harder than in any boardroom battle, harder than in any deal negotiation. For a man who could silence an entire board with one look, Patrick found himself completely powerless. His throat tightened, his lips parted, but no words came out. The room blurred slightly as moisture filled his eyes. Patrick Oscar, the man the world called unshakable, the man who had faced ruthless competition and built an empire with iron hands, suddenly sat frozen, his soul cracked wide open by the softest, most innocent plea he had ever heard. And for the first time in years, Patrick Oscar, the millionaire CEO, felt tears rising uncontrollably. Patrick leaned forward in his leather chair, his strong hands trembling against the polished wood of his desk. For a man who had commanded empires, who had bent ruthless competitors to his will with nothing more than a firm stare, he found himself speechless before a child barely 6 years old. His voice cracked when he finally managed to speak. "Sweetheart, why would you ask something like that?" The little girl shifted on her feet, her shoes squeaking softly against the floor. She raised her tiny face, her eyes as clear as glass, innocent. But behind them lived a pain no child should ever know. She bit her lip, her small shoulders rising and falling with a shaky breath. Then she spoke, her words slow, as though she had practiced them in her head many times before. "My friends all have dads," she said softly, her voice carrying across the large, cold office like a bell. "They walk them to school. They hold their hands when they cross the street. They kiss them goodnight and tuck them into bed. But me?" Her voice wavered. "I don't have one." Patrick's throat tightened, his heart thudding painfully. Anna's eyes filled with a heartbreaking mix of hope and sorrow. "My mommy says we don't have enough money for one. She says life is hard, but I shouldn't cry. But I do." Her tiny fingers uncurled to reveal the wrinkled dollar bill. "So I saved this. One whole dollar, maybe. Maybe it's enough. Can you tell me where I can buy a dad?" Her words hit Patrick like a blade through his chest. He had signed deals worth millions. He had bought entire companies overnight. But here was a child offering her entire world in the form of a single dollar bill. A dollar she had probably guarded under her pillow, a dollar that had been her ticket to hope. Patrick's lips trembled. He wanted to smile, to lighten the moment with comfort. But his face betrayed him. His mouth quivered, his jaw tightened, and his eyes burned. The silence in the room grew heavy, pressing down on him, until the only sound was the pounding of his heart. He stared at her, at the tiny hand clutching that dollar, at the courage it took for her to walk into a stranger's office with such a plea. This little girl, with messy hair and worn shoes, had spoken words that carried more weight than all the contracts he had ever signed in his life. Each word replayed in his mind. "Where can I buy a dad?" Patrick's chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths. He had never been caught so off guard, never been broken down so quickly. Deals, wealth, business, none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was the tiny soul standing before him, her heart laid bare, asking for the one thing she deserved most in this world: love, protection, a father. Patrick Oscar, the man who never bowed to pressure, felt his entire world shift under the weight of a 6-year-old's question. And for the first time in decades, he knew what it was to be truly powerless. Patrick rose slowly from his chair, his legs heavy, as if each step carried the weight of years of silence and loneliness. He moved around his massive desk, not as a CEO towering over contracts, but as a man stripped bare of all the walls he had built around his heart. When he reached the little girl, he lowered himself to the ground. His knees touched the cold marble floor, but he didn't care. For once, he needed to be eye level, not with a business rival, not with a negotiator, but with a child who had already lived through more pain than she ever should have. "What's your name, little one?" His voice was gentle, cracked with emotion, like he was afraid she might vanish if he spoke too loud. The girl hesitated, her lips trembling. Then, almost like a secret, she whispered, "Anna." Patrick repeated it softly, tasting the name on his tongue as if it carried a sacred weight. "Anna." His eyes drifted over her small frame. Her dress was faded, the fabric stretched from too many washes. The hem was frayed, and her shoes were scuffed until the leather peeled away. Her tiny hands were pale, her knuckles dry and cold. She was a fragile flower in a world too harsh for her. Patrick reached out slowly, his large hand trembling as it hovered near hers. Gently, he touched the crumpled dollar bill she held with such fierce protection. He slid it out of her grasp with the same care a man would use to lift a diamond crown. He turned it over in his palm, staring at it as if it was the rarest treasure he had ever seen. For her, this wasn't paper. This was hope. This was love she had tried to buy. His throat tightened painfully. "Where is your mommy?" he asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Anna's eyes lowered, her lashes heavy with secrets she shouldn't have to carry. "She works 2 jobs," she said softly. "She comes home late, and sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm asleep." Patrick's heart clenched. He pictured a woman working herself to exhaustion, hiding her pain from her child, holding on to strength that was crumbling beneath her. "She tells me not to worry," Anna continued, her voice quivering. "But I do. I see her hands shake. I hear her crying when she thinks I can't hear." Patrick wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms, but he forced himself to listen. Anna paused, her little fingers twisting together nervously. Then she looked up at him, her blue eyes glowing with desperation and hope. "I just want a dad to hug me. I want someone who won't leave." Her words pierced through him like a blade. He inhaled sharply, his chest aching, and suddenly, memories he had buried deep came rushing back. He saw himself as a boy, small and confused, standing in the doorway as his father left with a suitcase, never turning back. He remembered the silence that followed, the endless nights when his mother worked and cried, the empty chair at the dinner table, the ache of being unwanted. Patrick had built his empire on those scars. He had chased money, power, and respect, convincing himself he didn't need anyone. Every deal he signed was a battle cry against the abandonment that haunted him. But now, standing before a 6-year-old girl clutching nothing but trembling hope, Patrick saw the truth. His wealth, his empire, his endless success. It was nothing but a castle of glass, empty, cold, meaningless. Anna's pain was his reflection. Her words were his past echoing back at him. And for the first time, Patrick realized just how lonely his victories had been. His eyes burned, his throat raw. He reached out, brushing a stray curl from Anna's forehead with a tenderness that surprised even himself. In that moment, something inside him cracked open, something he didn't know still existed. A need, not for deals, not for money, but for connection, for family, for love. And it all started with a little girl who asked him for something money could never buy. Patrick swallowed hard, the lump in his throat growing heavier with every second. He felt as if the air itself had thickened, making it impossible to breathe. His world of boardrooms, contracts, and unshakable authority crumbled in the presence of one fragile question. Slowly, with deliberate care, he lowered himself onto the cold marble floor. The same man who once towered above everyone now sat eye level with a 6-year-old child, surrendering his pride, surrendering his power. His expensive suit wrinkled against the floor, but he didn't notice. For the first time in his life, he wasn't a CEO. He was just a man, broken open by the raw honesty of a child. "Anna," he whispered, his voice gentle and trembling, "you don't need money to buy a dad." The little girl's wide eyes searched his, as if weighing every word. Patrick leaned closer, his tone soft but strong. "A real father can't be bought. He isn't something you can pay for with $1 or even $1 million. A real father is someone who loves you, someone who protects you, someone who never lets go, no matter how hard life gets." Anna's small fingers twisted around the hem of her faded dress. Her lips quivered, her voice fragile as she asked the question that squeezed Patrick's heart tighter than any business deal ever had. "But where do I find one?" The innocence in her voice nearly shattered him. She wasn't demanding, she wasn't angry, she was simply hopeful, desperate for an answer. Patrick's eyes burned. He could hear his pulse in his ears, a steady, painful beat. He tried to swallow, but his voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Maybe," he paused, forcing back tears, "maybe you've already found him." Anna blinked, confused. Her little head tilted, curls falling into her face. Her small voice rose again, shaky but curious. "What do you mean?" Patrick inhaled deeply, his chest trembling. He lifted his hand slowly, carefully, as though afraid he might scare her away. His large hand hovered in the air before her, not offering money, not offering gifts, but something far greater, something he hadn't offered anyone in years. His heart. "Anna," he said, his voice breaking with raw truth. "If you'll let me, I'll be that dad. I'll be the one who stays, the one who hugs you, the one who never walks away." The silence that followed was unbearable, filled with tension, filled with hope. Anna's eyes shimmered, her lashes wet as unshed tears clung to them. She stared at his hand, then back at his face, searching for lies, searching for weakness. But all she saw was sincerity, an honesty so pure it frightened her, yet warmed her at the same time. Slowly, with the cautiousness of a child who had learned disappointment too early, she reached out her tiny hand. Her small fingers brushed against his. Patrick felt a spark, warmth, fragile but real, a connection, the kind of bond no contract, no empire, no amount of money could ever create. For a moment, the world outside that office ceased to exist. No city noise, no ringing phones, no ticking clock, just a man and a child, their hands meeting in a silent promise, a promise that would change both of their lives forever. And deep inside Patrick's chest, for the first time in decades, his lonely heart whispered, "Maybe I wasn't meant to build an empire. Maybe I was meant to build a family." From that day forward, Patrick Oscar's life began to shift in ways he could never have imagined. The once cold, echoing walls of his office were no longer ruled by silence. They now carried the sound of tiny footsteps, soft laughter, and the gentle voice of a child who had found a safe place to belong. Each evening, instead of finishing paperwork in loneliness, Patrick found Anna perched in the chair across from him, her legs swinging back and forth. She drew with crayons on the corners of his documents, doodling hearts and flowers across contracts worth millions. Instead of feeling irritation, Patrick laughed, real, hearty laughter that echoed through the room and startled his employees, who had never seen their boss smile like that before. Sometimes Anna would climb onto his lap, resting her little head against his chest, while he tried to explain business terms in words she could understand. She giggled when she got them wrong, and Patrick realized he loved her mistakes more than any perfect answer. His office, once a place of power and stress, had turned into a sanctuary of warmth. But Patrick's journey didn't stop with Anna. One evening, when he insisted on walking her home, he met the woman who had been carrying the weight of 2 lives alone, Anna's mother. She was young but worn, her eyes tired from endless nights of work, her hands rough from labor, yet beneath the exhaustion there was strength, a quiet resilience that held her together for the sake of her daughter. Patrick watched the way Anna's mother hugged her child, the way her face softened when Anna laughed. It struck him deeply. This woman had given Anna the only thing she could, the most important thing, love. Even with nothing, she had managed to give everything. For the first time, Patrick realized how blind he had been all his life. He had chased money, thinking it was the answer. Yet here, standing in a small, worn apartment, he saw riches far greater than any empire, a bond between mother and child that even poverty could not break. Slowly, Patrick found himself drawn to both of them. He offered not just money, but stability. He made sure Anna's mother didn't have to work 2 jobs anymore. He gave her dignity, treating her with the respect no one else had offered. He admired her strength, her courage, her ability to survive with grace in a world that had given her little. At first, she was hesitant. She feared pity. She feared charity. But Patrick proved through his actions that his intentions were pure. He wasn't there to replace her, but to stand beside her. And in that delicate balance, the 3 of them began to weave something beautiful together. Mornings became brighter. Evenings were no longer lonely. Patrick discovered the joy of small things. Holding Anna's hand as they crossed the street, helping with her homework, listening to her stories about imaginary kingdoms where he was the hero. He discovered the comfort of sitting at a modest kitchen table where laughter mattered more than silverware. For the first time in his life, Patrick wanted something money could never buy: a family. Not the kind of family that smiled for cameras or appeared in magazines. No, he wanted the kind of family where love lived in every glance, every word, every touch. The kind where two lonely souls, his and Anna's, had finally found a missing piece. And along with Anna's mother, they were building something richer than any fortune: trust, love, and belonging. Patrick Oscar, the man who once had everything but felt nothing, had finally found the one thing he didn't even know he was searching for. And this time he knew he would never let it go. One night, Patrick tucked Anna into bed. She held onto his sleeve and whispered, "You're my dad now, right?" Tears streamed down Patrick's face as he kissed her forehead. "Yes, Anna, forever." From that moment, Patrick Oscar wasn't just a millionaire CEO. He became a father, a protector, and a man finally healed. The lesson: in a world where people chase wealth, power, and success, what children need most cannot be bought. It is love, time, and family. Society must remember that no child should feel unloved, unwanted, or left behind. Every child deserves not money, but a hand to hold and a heart to come home to. And so, in the quiet of his mansion that no longer felt empty, Patrick whispered to himself, "I thought I had everything. But until Anna walked into my office, I had nothing at all."